The Nordic countries are regularly ranked among the world's happiest nations. High levels of equality and social trust are said to be among the main reasons why these countries have such high happiness levels. Today, I will discuss how trust and equality play a key role in the Nordic happiness with my guest, Dr. Bo Rothstein, a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. He co-founded the Quality of Government Institute at the same department. He has been a visiting scholar at Stanford University and Harvard University, among others. Some of his books include The Quality of Government, Making Sense of Corruption, and Just Institutions Matter. Dr. Bo, welcome to the program and thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the subject of social and institutional trust first. So we know the level of social and institutional trust is very high in Sweden, Finland, and also in other Nordic countries. So why do some countries have higher levels of social and institutional trust than others?
Well, together with my colleagues, I've tried to do research about the connection between social trust and institutional trust. And the question is, of course, if trusting people create trusting institutions, or if high quality, trustworthy institutions create more trusting people. And the latter seems very much to be the case, that in countries where the political and especially the, how should I say, public administration institutions are known to be honest, reasonably free from corruption, impartial, and reasonably effective. This creates more social trust, also trust between individuals, which is social trust. So not only do you get more trust in the institutions, you also get more trust in people in general in these societies. So to make a long story short, you can say that the opposite is also true, that the Chinese proverb is probably correct. The fish rots from the head down. A country that has highly corrupt, untrustworthy, discriminatory, ineffective political institutions will also get low interpersonal and social trust.
Yeah, I understand. So it has been argued that social trust cannot develop in hierarchical and class-based societies. Why is that?
I'm not so sure about this. I mean, all societies are to some extent hierarchical. I think the problem is not hierarchical, but if the hierarchy is seen to be illegitimate. So people get ahead in the society not because they are talented or work hard or maybe have luck, but because they have the right political connections or belong to the right families or have the possibility to influence institutions in an undue way. So what people seems to react against is not so much hierarchy, but various forms of favoritism that they think is unacceptable. So you can accept the hierarchy if the people who are, how should I say, higher in the hierarchy than you have come there because they are more talented, or they work hard, or they have made the right decisions. But it's more difficult to accept it if it's because they are born in the right families or have the right political connection or other types of unfair advantages.
Yeah, I understand. So does this mean such societies have an inherent disadvantage and can never get rid of this problem? What do you think?
I don't think this is structurally determined. We have seen, although it's quite rare, that there are societies who have been able to break with favoritism, corruption, and other types of unfair treatment. You have Singapore, you have Hong Kong, you have Georgia, you to some extent have South Korea, maybe also now Taiwan. So I don't think this is, as you know, history determines everything. No, things can be changed. Nobody says it's easy, but it can be changed, yes.
Okay, so if you can take the right measures and policies and steps, and if you are really determined about solving this problem, then it is possible that you will find a way. Maybe things can go from there, right?
Yeah, I think one very important thing is, I think, the principle of meritocracy, that people will accept that some people get into high-level positions because they basically are more talented or have worked more hard or studied more hard. What they don't accept is that this is because they have the right political connections or belong to the right group or the right ethnic group, the right religious group, the right families, and so on. So people have a very strong sense of procedural fairness, that things should go according to correct procedures. And if this is broken, for example, only children with very rich parents get into the good schools or get all the good jobs, then people think this is a very unfair society, and then they start distrusting not only the political institutions, but also other people in their society.
Yeah, I understand. So why are social trust and equality such powerful indicators of happiness? What's the relationship?
Well, it's not so far-fetched. I mean, when people in surveys get the question, do you think that you can, in general, trust most people? They cannot really answer that question because they don't know most people, right? So they must make some shortcuts about how to tackle this question. And what I and my colleagues think people do when they answer this question is that they make a kind of evaluation of the general moral standard of the society in which they live. Now, if you think that the general moral standard in your society that is good, institutions are basically functioning as they should, in general, people will, not take undue advantage of you. If you make a deal with people, with your neighbors, with other people in your village, they will honor the deal. They will not try to take undue advantage of you. If you think the other way around, then of course you will think that the general moral standard of your society is low. The other thing about equality is that the best way to do something about economic inequality is a system with universal social insurances and social services. So universal healthcare, universal education, universal unemployment, universal pensions, because that has a quite dramatic effect on the level of inequality. However, if most people think that you cannot trust the government institutions to actually deliver these services in a correct way, or if they think that most people will abuse the system, then it's very difficult to get such systems going. People can say, well, I think universal education or universal healthcare would be very good, but I distrust the government officials to handle the amount of money in a responsible way, or I think that people will abuse the system. Then it's very difficult to get this system accepted on a broad-based scale.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, take pensions, for example. General pensions, you have to, when you are working, accept that the government will take a substantial part of your wage and put it in a pension fund. And then you must have trust that when you actually get old, you will get the money. They will not, end up in Bahamas or wherever. And it's the same with elderly care and many other, and with health care. You're willing to pay high taxes for universal health care run by the government if you think that the government can actually deliver the health care or the elderly care when you need it. But if you think they will not do that, or you will be treated in a very unfair, or your integrity will not be respected, you can say, well, I think this in general is a good idea, but I distrust the government institutions and the government officials to handle this in a responsible way. So I refrain from, I don't, even if I'm a sort of liberal or leftist, I will say, no, I don't want to pay these taxes. We actually have quite substantial empirical indicators that this is how people think.
Yeah, I understand. And Dr. Bo, I think it almost works like human relationships. Like if you want to be in a relationship with someone, you must have trust in that person. If you cannot trust that person, you cannot have a relationship. So it also works like...
There are two reasons why social trust is important. One is the one you mentioned, transaction costs. So if you are two parties, two persons, and there is an agreement deal that both of you would benefit from, in order to enter into this deal, you must trust that the other person will deliver what you have agreed upon. And these agreements can, of course, be economic. They can be professional information. They can be social relations, but they can, of course, as you say, also be emotional things. You shouldn't enter into an emotional relation with a person whom you cannot trust. So if you don't have this trust, either a number of exchanges that for both parties would be very beneficial, economic, social, professional, emotional, will not come about because of this distrust. Either they will not come about or they will be very costly. Say you need to have a lot of legal advisors and lawyers in order to buy property or whatever. It's very complicated in some countries to do these things. So that is one reason why social trust is very important. The other reason is that there are many situations where you know that if you can trust most of your fellow citizens, you will all do better. So if everyone would sort their garbage or pay their taxes in due time or refrain from bribery and other things, everyone would do better. But, it makes very little sense to be the only one in your village who sort your garbage or pay your taxes or don't free ride on the buses and so on. So, and the problem here is that the thing that is going to be produced, this public good, will not be produced if you think that most other people will actually be free riding. They will take advantage of the good, but they will not pay. And then you come into what I have defined as a social trap. You're trapped in your mistrust because everyone knows that if they could trust other people, everything would go better. But how should I say? Trust cannot be manufactured. If you actually do not have the trust, you cannot order people to trust, or you cannot make yourself trust people whom you have a feeling they should not be trusted. They are not trustworthy. Yeah. So there are a lot of like everything from the rule of law to roads to the defense to social insurances, that everyone knows if we could get our thing together and everyone would, not everyone, but almost everyone would play by the rules, things would go better. But if you have a feeling that this is not the case, you don't want to be the only one who pay your taxes or sort your garbage or refrain from all kind of environmentally bad behavior, because the thing that is going to be produced, there is a need that not everyone, but almost everyone play by the rules. Otherwise, the thing will not happen.
Yeah.
So these are the two reasons why social trust is very important to society. You get lower transaction cost, but you can also produce, if you have the trust, a number of public goods that everyone would benefit from.
Yeah, I understand. So let's talk about the Nordic countries now. So these countries historically had lower levels of corruption and more honest government institutions. And this helped create high social trust in the societies. So how can high trust be developed in countries that have the opposite type of governments, let's say corrupt and dishonest governments?
Well, let me pull back a little. It's not the case that these countries always had very good institutions and very low corruption. If you go back to the first half of the 19th century, these countries had corruption maybe not on a Nigerian level, but well on an Albanian level, you would say. So public positions were sold and bought. There was no meritocracy. You could have 5, 6 public positions and then have other people do their job. So public positions like a tax collector were seen as a kind of feudal fiefdom. And then in both Denmark, Norway, and in Sweden, Finland, this changes dramatically in the mid-19th century. And I can send you the papers I've written about this. There is a dramatic change from, say, 1850 to 1880, where the whole idea of what it is to have a public position changes. It's not seen as a private property that you can use for your own benefit. It changes to some more duty-oriented thing where you have to follow what can be seen as the common or the public good. And it's not so easy to see why this change occurs, but you have the same at the same time in England, in France, in Germany, to some extent a little later in the United States. So there is a change in the second half of the 19th century in some Northern European countries to a more, how should I say, universalistic, impartial type of public administration. To some extent, this comes from the need from the state to actually survive. Denmark was really threatened by Germany. Sweden was really threatened by Russia. So and to some extent, I mean, when Sweden loses Finland in 1809, to a large extent, this is blamed that the officers in the army didn't know how to fight. They had bought their positions. They were amateurs. They were nobility, the sons of aristocrats. But there is a kind of feeling that in both countries, that if we don't get our act together, there is a risk that the country will continue to exist. There was a feeling in 1809 in Sweden that Napoleon and the Russian Tsar had decided to divide Sweden in the middle. The southern half would go to Denmark and the northern half would go to Russia. And so you get the reform movement. There is a kind of avalanche of reforms of the public sector in order to change the system from this type of feudalistic, semi-corrupt, personalistic type of rule to a more Max Weber-oriented, impartial type of professional administration. So it's not the case that, this was inherited from the Middle Ages, no. In the 17th century and 18th century, the Swedish political system was actually very corrupt.
Okay.
So there is a big bang change or a turning point in the later part of the 19th century. I can send you the papers I will send you the papers, you can take a look. We have tried to, we are not professional historians, but we tried to dig this out, why it happened. And one thing you can see is that in the early 19th century, they start taking public officials, civil servants, to court for bribery. And they are sentenced. And the number of sentences goes up until, say, 1840, 1850. And then it goes dramatically down, both in Sweden and Denmark, and then it's gone. So that there is one thing that happens is that it becomes possible to take corrupt, discriminatory civil servants, high-level civil servants, to court and sentence them. That seems to be one very important thing.
Yeah,
and you can, so we have gone through the court cases, and we can see this U-shaped curve. It starts, it goes up, and then it goes down, and then it is away. Now, it's not the case that the Nordic countries are free of corruption. That could never be a country free of corruption. That would be as likely as a country free of crime. It will never happen. But it's, of course, on a scale that is much lower than in many other countries.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks. So having universal social welfare policies is said to be a key reason for high levels of happiness in the Nordic countries. But the problem is not all countries can offer such wide and comprehensive welfare benefits. So do you think this means other countries can never be as happy as the Nordic countries if they cannot?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I think there is a misunderstanding about universal social insurances and social services, that they are very expensive. Nominally, that is true, but in reality not, because if you take a middle-class family in Sweden, and one day the government would come and say, yes, you are paying too high taxes, we will lower your taxes with 30%. Wow, they would say, very nice. But then they would say, you will have to take a private health insurance, you will have to take a private pension system, you will have to pay for your kids' college education. Now, what would they do with the money? They would, of course, have to pay this. And that, in all likelihood, would be much more expensive than if you have a universal system for, the theory is known as asymmetric information problems. And so they are nominally more expensive, but since most of the money doesn't go to welfare for poor people, it goes to social services, social insurance that most middle-class people want and are willing to pay for. Either they pay for them by taxes or they pay for them privately. Now, if you take the United States, for example, who have a lot of private health insurance, that is enormously more expensive for various reasons than if you have a public system. So it looks more expensive, but in reality for society, it's not so much more expensive. The best thing with this system is that they include also low resource, working class, poor people who would otherwise not be able to afford it.
Yeah, I understand. Do you think the Nordic countries are the best countries in the world?
That is a very difficult question. The Nordic countries have serious problems in their own. I mean, Sweden, especially my own country, has a huge problem with a non-functioning integration of immigrants. That has created lots of problems. There is a huge problem with youth gang violence for the moment. Sweden has also become, we used to be the country that in the OECD countries was the most economically equal. That is not so anymore. The level of inequality has increased dramatically in Sweden during the last 15 years. So this is not a country without its problems, of course. But it is the case that as it can be measured, the question is actually not if you're happy in the survey. The question is, are you satisfied with your life? And it may be the case that you can be quite satisfied with your life, but it's not sure that you're very happy still. What I think the universal social insurance and social service system delivers is a kind feeling of personal security and a feeling that if you actually need the service or the insurances, it will actually be delivered in a reasonable way. Now, Sweden didn't do so well when it came to the corona epidemic. So here is a question, especially for Sweden. The other Nordic countries did better than Sweden. And this is a long story why this is so. I mean, if you take Europe, you would think that if you would live in Sicily, where the sun is always shining and the wine is good and almost free and the food is delicious, they would be the most happy people in Europe. That is not the case. They are quite unhappy. Or the people who live in Greece, for example. So I think it is this the feeling of that you live in a system that is reasonably fair, far from perfect, but reasonably fair. And that if bad things happen to you, if you get ill, if one of your kids get a serious disease, if your parents need expensive health care when they are old, this will be delivered in some way. I think this creates a kind of security in life that is important. I also think that the idea of free higher education is very important.
Yeah.
So we don't, in the Nordic country, you don't pay tuition to send your kids to college. And that, I think, gives again, it's not the perfect system, but there is an overrepresentation of middle class kids and so, but still it gives a sense that if you are talented and work hard, you can actually climb the social ladder, even if you're not born in a rich or well-to-do family. I think that is very important.
Yeah, I understand. And also, I wrote this article to explain the Finnish happiness, and I used the example of the Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin. She comes from quite a poor family, but because the social mobility is very high in the Nordic countries, as I have found in the World Economic Forum's report. So even if you are not born in a rich family in the Nordic countries, you can still climb the social ladder. The chances are still there for you because it's mostly meritocratic society. So if you work hard and if you are talented, so you can actually expect that you will do better in life, which is not the case in many other countries, even though
most other countries, I would say. We found, I and my colleagues, that in high corrupt countries, there is much lower social mobility. Why is that? Because in a highly corrupt country, the economic and political elite will be able to use all kinds of bad tricks to get their unambitious and untalented kids into good schools and good jobs. That is not really the case in the Nordic countries. There is, of course, for many reasons, an overrepresentation of middle-class kids at universities and so, but it's still the case that children from not so prosperous families can do well, especially actually in Sweden. Now immigrant girls are doing very well in the educational system, actually a little better than the Swedish boys.
So I think because
The
they have,
immigrant boys are not doing so well, I should say. But the immigrant girls are doing very well. And we have a high number already of very visible public intellectuals who are immigrant, semi-young women, I should say. Who, they are editors, they are well-known journalists, they are on television, they are doing well in academia, and so on. So that is an important case, of course.
Yeah, I understand. So thank you, Dr. Bo. It was really nice talking to you, and I want to finish the meeting now. And I really enjoyed talking to you. And also, thanks for your time. Thanks for attending the interview.
Been a pleasure. Best of luck with your work. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.